The day I buried my mother, I believed I had already experienced the greatest heartbreak a person could endure. I stood beside her grave, clutching a single white rose as the cold autumn wind carried away the last echoes of the pastor's prayer. Family members hugged me. Friends whispered their condolences. Everyone kept telling me to stay strong. I smiled. I thanked them. I pretended I would be okay, but inside, I was completely shattered. My mother, Evelyn Carter, wasn't just my mother. She had been my best friend, my mentor, and the only person who had ever loved me without conditions. She had fought cancer for 3 long years. I left my career to become her full-time caregiver because I couldn't bear the thought of strangers looking after the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise my younger sister and me after our father passed away. I never regretted that decision, not even once. What I did regret was trusting the 2 people standing beside me at her funeral, my husband and my own sister. 3 days after we buried my mother, they destroyed what was left of my life. But they made one mistake, one tiny mistake they never saw coming. Because hidden inside an old sewing machine that everyone believed was worthless, my mother had left me one final letter, and that letter exposed every lie they had ever told. Before we continue, if you enjoy powerful stories of betrayal, shocking secrets, and unforgettable karma, you're in the right place. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Twisted Truths, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. We'd also love to know where you're watching from, so leave a comment below and join our growing family. Now, let me tell you how everything fell apart. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 38 years old. Until a few weeks ago, I believed my life wasn't perfect, but it was real. I'd been married to Daniel for 12 years. We met when we were both working at the same insurance company in Chicago. Back then, Daniel was charming, funny, ambitious, the kind of man who could make an entire room laugh without trying. Everyone loved him, including me. Looking back now, I wonder if I ever truly knew the man I married, or if I simply fell in love with the version he wanted me to see. When my mother was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, everything changed. Daniel encouraged me to leave my job. "We'll manage," he told me one evening as he wrapped his arms around me in our kitchen. "Your mother needs you more than your office does." I cried into his shoulder that night. I remember thinking, how lucky am I to have a husband like this? For the next 3 years, my entire world revolved around hospitals, medications, doctor appointments, and sleepless nights. Cancer doesn't just attack one person. It attacks an entire family. There were days my mother couldn't even lift a spoon without trembling. Some nights she woke up screaming from the pain. Other nights she apologized to me for becoming a burden. Every single time, I told her the same thing. "You carried me for 9 months, Mom. The least I can do is carry you through this." She would smile through her tears. "I don't deserve you, Emma. You deserve everything." Those became some of our last meaningful conversations. Meanwhile, Daniel started changing. At first, it was little things. Working late, coming home distracted, always checking his phone. When I asked if everything was okay, he smiled. "Just stress at work." I believed him. Because trust doesn't disappear overnight. It fades, one unnoticed lie at a time. Then there was my younger sister, Melissa. Melissa had always been beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. Growing up, people constantly compared us. Emma is the responsible one. Melissa is the fun one. Emma studies. Melissa lives. I never hated her for it. She was my little sister. I loved her despite our differences. She visited Mom every weekend. She always brought flowers. She hugged me tightly. "You need to take care of yourself too," she'd say. Sometimes she'd even insist on staying overnight so I could get some sleep. Looking back, those weren't acts of kindness. They were opportunities. Opportunities I was too exhausted to recognize. One evening, while making tea for my mother, I walked back into the living room and noticed something strange. Daniel and Melissa stopped talking the exact moment I entered. They looked at each other, then quickly looked away. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. But something about that silence felt wrong. "What were you two talking about?" I asked casually. Melissa laughed. "Oh, Daniel was just telling me about a nightmare he had." Daniel nodded almost too quickly. "Yeah, weird dream." I smiled. But a small voice deep inside me whispered, "They're lying." I ignored it. Grief has a way of making you suspicious of everything, or so I told myself. Months passed. Mom grew weaker. The doctors stopped talking about treatment. Instead, they started talking about comfort. One rainy afternoon, while I was helping her adjust the blankets around her bed, she reached for my hand. Her fingers felt impossibly light, almost weightless. "Emma, I'm here, Mom." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. When I'm gone, I immediately shook my head. "Please don't. Listen to me." Tears filled both our eyes. "There are things people do when they think no one is watching." I frowned. "I don't understand." She looked toward the bedroom door to make sure no one was standing outside. Then she whispered something that made my heart race. "Not everyone in this family loves the way they pretend to." Before I could ask what she meant, the nurse entered the room. The conversation ended. Forever. My mother passed away the following morning, and with her, every answer I desperately needed. Or so I believed, because 3 days after the funeral, my husband walked into our living room carrying a brown envelope. His face was cold, empty, emotionless. He placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. Then he said 5 words that changed my life forever. "Emma, I want a divorce." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I stared at Daniel, waiting for him to smile and tell me this was some cruel joke. He didn't. Instead, he calmly sat down across from me, folded his hands together, and avoided looking me in the eyes. "I've thought about this for a long time," he said quietly. "This marriage isn't working anymore." My voice trembled. "What are you talking about? We buried my mother 3 days ago." "I know. You know," I repeated, disbelief filling every word. "Daniel, my mother just died. I didn't choose the timing." "No," I snapped. "You chose something much worse. For 12 years, we had built a life together. We had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas mornings, and countless ordinary evenings that I thought meant something. And now, he was throwing all of it away while I was still trying to remember how to live without my mother. "Is there someone else?" I asked. His silence answered before his mouth did. Finally, he nodded. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words hurt more than if he had shouted. "Who is she?" He rubbed his forehead. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." I stood so quickly that the coffee mug beside me crashed onto the floor, shattering into dozens of pieces. "It matters to me. It matters because I gave up my career for this family. I spent 3 years taking care of my dying mother while trusting you to protect our marriage. I'm not proud of how this happened." "When? What? When did you stop loving me?" He looked at the floor. "I don't know." "No." I shook my head. "You know exactly when." His silence filled the room. Then, someone knocked on the front door. Daniel looked toward it. "They're here." My heart skipped. "They?" He stood. "You should sit down." Every instinct told me to run. Instead, I walked to the door myself. When I opened it, my younger sister Melissa stood there. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't dressed in black. Instead, she wore an expensive cream-colored coat. Her makeup was flawless, and in one hand she held a leather folder. She smiled. Not the smile of a grieving daughter, the smile of someone who believed she'd already won. "Hi, Emma." I looked from her, to Daniel, then back again. "What is this?" Melissa stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I think we should all sit down." "No, this won't take long." I said no. Daniel sighed. "Emma." I turned toward him. "You knew she was coming?" He nodded. That's when I noticed it. He wasn't standing beside me anymore. He had quietly moved to stand beside Melissa, side by side, as if they belonged together. A cold chill ran through my body. My voice barely came out. "Tell me." Neither of them spoke. I swallowed hard. "Tell me I'm imagining what's happening." Melissa lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." The words sounded rehearsed, almost practiced. Daniel finally reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she held it. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. I couldn't hear anything for several seconds, except the sound of my own heartbeat. "No," I whispered. "No." Daniel closed his eyes. "We've been seeing each other." I laughed, not because anything was funny, because my mind refused to believe what my ears had just heard. My little sister? Nobody answered. My own sister? Melissa started crying. It wasn't planned. I stared at her. You expect me to believe that? No. I pointed toward the door. My mother loved you both. Neither of them moved. She died believing we were a family. Daniel looked ashamed. Melissa looked guilty, but neither looked surprised. That's when I realized something terrifying. This conversation had been rehearsed. They had prepared for this, long before my mother died. Long before the funeral. Long before I had any reason to suspect them. Every hug, every comforting word, every fake tear, every promise. It had all been an act. I slowly sank back onto the sofa. I don't understand. Melissa opened the leather folder. There's something else. I looked at her through blurred vision. What else could you possibly take from me? She removed several documents. Our mother's attorney contacted me yesterday. I frowned. Why would he contact you? He said there were updated estate documents. My stomach tightened. What documents? Melissa slid a stack of papers across the table. The new will. I immediately shook my head. No. Our mother changed it 6 months ago. That's impossible. Daniel spoke quietly. The paperwork is legal. I grabbed the papers with shaking hands. There, at the bottom of every page, was my mother's signature. According to the document, Melissa had inherited the family home. The home where I grew up. The home where I had cared for our mother until her final breath. The home where every memory of my childhood lived. My name appeared only once. A small cash inheritance. $25,000. Nothing else. I stared at the pages. No. Melissa looked almost sympathetic. I didn't know she changed it either. Liar. Emma, liar. I slammed the papers onto the table. My mother would never do this. Daniel leaned forward. The lawyer confirmed it. My mother promised that house would stay in our family. It is staying in the family. I turned toward Melissa. You've got some nerve saying that. She looked away. I know you're hurting. Hurting? I laughed bitterly. You slept with my husband. You waited until our mother died. And now you're stealing my home. Her tears came instantly. I never wanted it to happen like this. Then how did you want it to happen? Silence. That answer told me everything. She hadn't wanted to avoid betraying me. She only wished it had been easier. Daniel cleared his throat. There's one more thing. I looked at him with empty eyes. What now? He took a deep breath. The house is already in Melissa's name. What? The transfer has been completed. I felt as though the room tilted. You transferred it already? It happened this morning. This morning, while I had been sitting alone in my bedroom looking through my mother's old photographs, they had been signing documents to take away the only thing she left behind. I couldn't believe how quickly my life was disappearing. Then Daniel quietly added the sentence that finally broke me. You'll need to move out by the end of the week. For a moment, I genuinely thought I was going to faint. I looked around the living room. Every picture, every chair, every memory. My mother's favorite reading lamp still stood in the corner. The blanket I had wrapped around her during chemotherapy was still folded neatly on the couch. Her knitting basket sat beside the fireplace exactly where she had left it. They weren't just taking a house. They were erasing my mother. I stood slowly. Neither of them spoke. Without another word, I walked upstairs, into my mother's bedroom. The room still smelled faintly of lavender. Her reading glasses rested on the nightstand. Her Bible remained open to the last page she had read. I collapsed onto her bed and cried harder than I had at her funeral. Hours later, after Daniel and Melissa had left, I finally gathered enough strength to begin packing. As I opened the old hallway closet, something fell onto the floor with a dull thud. It was my mother's antique sewing machine, the same machine she had refused to throw away for over 40 years. I smiled through my tears. At least they don't want you to. I reached down to lift it, when my fingers brushed against something unusual underneath. The wooden base felt hollow. I frowned. My mother had owned this sewing machine for decades. Why had I never noticed that before? I turned it over. There, almost invisible beneath years of dust, was a tiny brass keyhole. My heart began pounding. For several seconds, I simply stared at the tiny brass keyhole beneath my mother's old sewing machine. My tears stopped. My breathing became shallow. I ran my fingers over the wood again, convinced grief was playing tricks on my mind. But the keyhole was real. My mother had owned this sewing machine since before I was born. She had sewn my first school uniform with it. She had repaired my father's police uniforms after long shifts. She had even made the dress I wore on my wedding day. How had I never noticed it? I carefully searched every drawer attached to the machine. Nothing. I checked the box of sewing supplies beside it. Buttons, thread, needles, old measuring tape. Still nothing. Then I remembered something. When I was a little girl, my mother always wore a delicate silver necklace. Instead of a pendant, there was a tiny silver key. Whenever I asked what it opened, she would smile and say, "Something you'll understand one day." After she became sick, she stopped wearing the necklace. I had assumed it had been misplaced during one of her hospital visits. Suddenly, I knew exactly where to look. I rushed upstairs to her bedroom. Most of her jewelry had already been packed into a small wooden box inside her dresser. With trembling hands, I opened it. Pearl earrings, a gold wedding ring, an old brooch. Then, beneath a folded handkerchief, I saw it, the silver necklace, and hanging from it was the tiny key. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. I hurried back downstairs, knelt beside the sewing machine, and gently inserted the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard a soft click. A hidden panel slowly lifted. Inside was a thick brown envelope. On the front, written in my mother's familiar handwriting, were 7 words. "Only Emma must ever read this." The moment I saw her handwriting, I broke down crying. I carefully opened the envelope as though it were the most fragile thing in the world. Inside were several documents, but resting on top was a handwritten letter. I unfolded it carefully. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this letter, it means I am no longer with you. If life has gone the way I prayed it would, then you'll never need what I've hidden here. But if you're holding this letter, then the people I feared most have already betrayed you." My hands began shaking uncontrollably. I kept reading. "There are some things a mother notices that others don't. People think illness weakens you. Sometimes, it simply gives you more time to watch." Tears blurred my vision. My mother had known. She had known. She continued, "I have watched Daniel become impatient whenever he thought you weren't looking. I have seen Melissa grow interested in things that never belonged to her. More than once, I caught them talking in whispers the moment I entered the room. They believed an old woman fighting cancer wouldn't notice. They were wrong." I covered my mouth. Every strange feeling, every uncomfortable silence, every moment I had ignored. My mother had seen it too. The next paragraph stole the air from my lungs. One afternoon, I returned home early from a medical appointment after the hospital canceled my scan. I found Daniel's car parked outside. When I entered quietly, I saw something no mother should ever witness. I stopped reading. My heart refused to continue. Slowly, I forced myself to finish. "I saw Daniel kissing your sister in my kitchen." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. My vision blurred. I couldn't breathe. They hadn't started their affair after my mother's death. They hadn't even started it during her final illness. It had been happening while she was still alive, while she lay upstairs fighting for every breath, while I sat beside her hospital bed praying for a miracle. I continued reading through my tears. I confronted them immediately. "They begged me not to tell you." Melissa cried and swore it had only happened once. Daniel claimed he was confused. Neither of them knew I had already begun recording our conversation. I froze. Recording? I looked back inside the envelope. Beneath the letter was a small flash drive. My mother continued, "Everything they admitted that afternoon is stored on that drive." I stared at it in disbelief. My 70-year-old mother had secretly recorded them. She had gathered evidence. She had protected me, even while dying. The next page revealed something even more shocking. 3 weeks later, Daniel asked me questions about changing my will. He pretended he was trying to help organize my affairs. That was the moment I realized they weren't only after each other. They were after my house. I felt sick. Every act of kindness, every offer to help, every fake smile, it had all been about money. The letter continued, "Emma, I never changed my will. Anyone claiming otherwise is lying." My eyes widened. What? I read the sentence again. Then again. The document Melissa had shown me was fake. My mother had anticipated exactly what they would try to do. The envelope contained another sealed folder labeled Original Will. I opened it. It bore the same law firm seal I recognized. Everything looked official. The house was left entirely to me, exactly as my mother had promised. Tucked behind it was another envelope containing bank statements, notarized copies of legal documents, and a business card. The card read, Margaret Holloway Estate Attorney. On the back, my mother had handwritten, "If anything happens, trust only Margaret." I wiped my tears and immediately reached for my phone. It was almost 6 in the evening. The law office was closed. Still, I called. To my surprise, someone answered. Law offices of Margaret Holloway. My voice shook. My name is Emma Carter. There was a long pause. Then the receptionist asked quietly, "Are you Evelyn Carter's daughter?" "Yes. Please hold." A few seconds later, another woman came onto the line. "Emma?" "Yes." My goodness. Her voice sounded emotional. "I've been waiting for this call." My heart skipped. "Waiting? Your mother instructed me to expect it." I sat in stunned silence. She did? She told me that if you ever called, it would mean her worst fears had come true. Fresh tears rolled down my face. "I found her letter." Margaret sighed deeply. "Then you've also found the truth." "I don't understand." "You will." There was another pause. Then she said something that sent a chill through my entire body. "Emma, the forged will isn't the only crime they committed." I stopped breathing. "What do you mean?" "I'd rather explain it in person." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." "Please." My voice cracked. "I need to know now." Margaret hesitated. Then she spoke carefully. 3 months before your mother died, someone attempted to transfer ownership of her house. I gripped the phone tighter. "What?" "The transfer was rejected because your mother personally appeared in my office and refused to sign." My entire body went cold. "They tried before she died?" "Yes." "And after she refused?" Margaret's voice became almost a whisper. "They came back with forged documents." The room began spinning. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This wasn't even just about stealing a house. This had been planned for months, maybe years. As I ended the call, I looked around the empty house one last time. Every memory suddenly felt different. Every smile I remembered from Daniel, every hug from Melissa, every family dinner, every Christmas photograph, every birthday celebration. Had all of it been fake? I didn't know anymore. But one thing had become painfully clear. I wasn't fighting a broken marriage. I was fighting 2 people who had spent years quietly building a lie around me. And I had a feeling the flash drive my mother left behind was about to expose far more than either of them ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel and Melissa standing side by side in my living room, holding hands while my entire world crumbled around me. By morning, I had cried so much there were no tears left, only determination. At exactly 9 o'clock, I pulled into the parking lot of Margaret Holloway's law office. The building wasn't glamorous. It was an old brick office tucked between a bookstore and a coffee shop. But somehow, it felt safe. As soon as I stepped inside, the receptionist smiled gently. "Ms. Carter?" I nodded. "Ms. Holloway is expecting you." Margaret was in her early 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded me of my mother. The moment she saw me, she stood and embraced me. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Emma." "Thank you." She motioned for me to sit. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at the brown envelope resting in my lap. "You found everything?" "I think so." She nodded. "Your mother hoped you'd never need it." I looked down. So did I. Margaret folded her hands. "Emma, your mother wasn't just my client. We'd been friends for nearly 30 years. That surprised me. I never knew. She didn't like talking about legal matters at home." Margaret opened a folder from her desk. "The day Evelyn came to see me, she wasn't thinking about dying. She was thinking about protecting you." I swallowed hard. "She knew?" Margaret nodded. "She didn't have proof at first, but she had instincts. And your mother trusted her instincts." She reached into the folder and removed several documents. "This," she said, sliding the first page toward me, "is the genuine copy of your mother's will." It matched the one I'd found inside the sewing machine. Every signature, every page, every witness. Everything was legitimate. Then Margaret placed another document beside it. "This," she said quietly, "is the copy that Melissa submitted after your mother's death." I looked between them. At first glance, They appeared almost identical. Then Margaret pointed to the signature. Notice anything? I leaned closer. The signature looked slightly different. The letters weren't as smooth. The spacing wasn't quite right. It looks shaky. Margaret nodded. Because someone traced it. I felt my stomach tighten. It isn't her signature? No. She looked directly into my eyes. Emma, your mother's will was forged. Hearing the words spoken aloud somehow made them even more painful. This isn't just unethical, Margaret continued. It's a felony. I sat there in stunned silence. Daniel hadn't simply cheated on me. Melissa hadn't simply betrayed me. They had committed a crime. Margaret reached for another file. I hired a forensic document examiner before your mother passed away. You… what? Your mother asked me to. I blinked. She expected this? Margaret sighed. She hoped she was wrong. But she wanted to be prepared. Inside the folder were professional reports, comparing handwriting samples. The conclusion appeared in bold letters. The signature on the submitted will is not consistent with known samples of Evelyn Carter's writing. My hands trembled. They never had a chance, I whispered. Margaret gave me a sad smile. They thought they were smarter than a dying woman. They weren't. Then she reached toward the flash drive my mother had left. Are you ready? I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Margaret plugged it into her computer. The screen flickered. Then, the video began. At first, the camera pointed toward the kitchen ceiling. The picture wasn't perfect. My mother had obviously hidden her phone behind a row of cookbooks. A few seconds later, Daniel walked into the kitchen. Melissa followed him. Then, they kissed. I immediately looked away. I can't. Margaret gently placed a hand on mine. You need to see this. So I forced myself to keep watching. A few moments later, my mother's voice echoed through the room. What exactly do you think you're doing? Daniel and Melissa jumped apart. Melissa burst into tears almost instantly. Mom? Don't call me Mom. My mother's voice was calm. Disappointed. Not angry. Just heartbroken. Daniel stepped forward. Evelyn, please let us explain. No. You'll listen. There was a long silence. Then, Daniel said something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. My mother replied, When did it start? Melissa lowered her head. Almost. She hesitated. Daniel finished the sentence. Almost 2 years ago. I stopped breathing. 2 years. For 2 entire years, they had been lying to my face, celebrating holidays with me, eating dinner at my table, comforting me while my mother battled cancer, all while secretly destroying my family. The recording continued. My mother asked the question I couldn't bring myself to ask. Do you love each other? Melissa quietly answered, I don't know. Daniel remained silent. Then my mother asked another question, one that changed everything. Or is this really about my house? The room became quiet. No one answered. My mother's voice grew firmer. Answer me. Daniel finally spoke. The house changes everything. I froze. He actually said it. Not love, not regret. The house. My mother continued. I knew it. Daniel sighed. We've struggled financially. We've got debts. The property is worth over $1 million now. $1 million? I stared at Margaret. She nodded. The neighborhood became one of the most valuable in Chicago over the last decade. I had no idea. To me, it had always just been home. On the screen, my mother looked at both of them. So that's what my daughter is worth to you? Neither answered. Then came the sentence that broke my heart more than anything else. My mother looked directly at Melissa. I raised you better than this. Melissa started sobbing. I'm sorry. No, my mother replied. You're sorry you were caught. Silence filled the room. Then Daniel said something that neither of them could ever take back. If Emma wasn't so trusting, this would have been easier. I covered my mouth. Every part of me wanted to scream. Margaret quietly paused the video. There are 43 minutes of footage. Every minute is admissible. I sat there unable to speak. After several moments, Margaret opened another folder. There is something else. I looked at her. What now? She slid several bank statements across the desk. Your husband didn't only plan to steal the house. He also emptied your savings. What? I grabbed the documents. Over the past 11 months, Daniel had quietly transferred money from our joint account into several different accounts. $5,000, $8,000, $3,000, $10,000. By the time my mother died, more than $180,000 had disappeared. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How? You trusted him, Margaret answered gently. He managed the household finances. I buried my face in my hands. Everything. He had taken everything. Then Margaret's phone rang. She answered. Her expression changed immediately. Yes, I understand. I'll tell her. She ended the call and looked at me. That was the investigator. My heart pounded. What did he find? Margaret took a deep breath. Daniel and Melissa are trying to sell your mother's house. What? They've already listed it. I shot to my feet. They can't. They intend to close the sale within 3 weeks. I could barely breathe. If they sold the house, my mother's memories would disappear forever. Margaret stood calmly. Emma. She smiled for the first time that morning. They think they're racing against time. I frowned. What do you mean? She handed me a thick legal document. Because by this afternoon, we're asking the court to freeze the property. I stared at the papers. And once that happens, Margaret smiled again. They're about to learn something your mother always believed. I looked at her. She said quietly, you can fool people for a while, but you can never outrun the truth. For the first time since my mother's funeral, I wasn't crying. I was fighting. That afternoon, Margaret filed an emergency motion with the court. Within hours, a judge issued a temporary order freezing the sale of my mother's house until ownership could be legally determined. Daniel and Melissa had no idea. They were preparing to show the house to potential buyers. Instead, they opened the front door to find 2 sheriff's deputies, a court officer, and Margaret standing on the porch. I wasn't there. I didn't want revenge to cloud my judgment. But Margaret later told me exactly what happened. Daniel smiled confidently when he opened the door. Can I help you? The court officer handed him an envelope. You've been served. Daniel frowned. Served for what? Fraud, forgery, and unlawful transfer of property. His face immediately lost its color. Melissa stepped into the hallway. What's going on? The officer looked directly at her. Ma'am, this property is now under court protection. It cannot be sold, transferred, refinanced, or occupied without authorization. Melissa's voice shook. There has to be some mistake. There isn't. Daniel tried to argue. We legally own this house. Margaret calmly interrupted. No. She looked him straight in the eye. You thought you did. The following weeks became a nightmare for them, and the beginning of healing for me. The police launched a criminal investigation. The handwriting expert officially confirmed that my mother's signature had been forged. The recording from the flash drive was authenticated. The bank records proved Daniel had secretly drained nearly $200,000 from our joint savings. Every lie they told created another piece of evidence against them. Then came the discovery no one expected. Detectives recovered dozens of deleted messages between Daniel and Melissa, messages they believed had disappeared forever. One message, sent nearly 18 months before my mother died, read, Once the old woman is gone, Emma will be too heartbroken to question anything. Another said, She trusts us completely. This is going to be easier than we thought. When Margaret showed me those messages, I felt strangely calm. Not because they didn't hurt, but because they proved something important. I hadn't imagined the betrayal. It had been real, planned, calculated, deliberate. 6 months after my mother's funeral, the case finally went to court. The courtroom was packed. Friends, neighbors, even reporters. Word had spread quickly through the community. Daniel sat beside his attorney. Melissa avoided looking at me. For the first time in months, they looked afraid, not because they were innocent, because they knew they weren't. The judge entered. Everyone stood. As the trial began, Daniel's lawyer tried to paint me as an emotional daughter who simply couldn't accept her mother's wishes. But then, Margaret presented the original will. The handwriting expert testified. The forensic examiner explained every difference between the genuine signature and the forged one. Then, the prosecutor played my mother's recording. The courtroom became completely silent. Everyone heard Daniel admit that the house changed everything. Everyone heard Melissa apologize after being caught. Everyone heard my mother ask, So, that's what my daughter is worth to you? Some jurors wiped tears from their eyes. I did too. It felt as though my mother had entered the courtroom one final time, to speak for herself. Then came the bank records. Every transfer, every withdrawal, every hidden account. Daniel couldn't explain any of it. Finally, the prosecutor asked him one simple question. Mr. Harris, did your wife ever authorize you to transfer $183,000 from your joint savings? Daniel looked down. No. Did Evelyn Carter ever sign the document transferring ownership of her home to Melissa Carter? Silence. The judge leaned forward. Answer the question. Daniel closed his eyes. No. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Melissa began crying uncontrollably. For the first time, there were no lies left to hide behind. 3 days later, the judge delivered the verdict. I don't think I'll ever forget those words. The court finds the submitted will fraudulent. The transfer of property is declared null and void. Ownership of the Carter residence is immediately restored to Emma Carter. I closed my eyes. My mother's house was finally home again. But the judge wasn't finished. He continued. The evidence further supports charges of forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and financial theft. The criminal proceedings moved forward separately. Months later, Daniel accepted a plea agreement that included prison time, financial restitution, and the permanent loss of his professional license. Melissa avoided prison because she cooperated with investigators, but she received probation, heavy financial penalties, and a permanent criminal record. Neither of them ever inherited a single dollar. Neither of them ever lived in my mother's house again, and neither of them spoke to me after the trial. People often ask if I forgave them. The truth? Forgiveness isn't something you owe the people who destroyed your peace. It's something you choose for yourself when you're ready. I didn't forgive them because a judge told me to. I forgave them because I refused to spend the rest of my life carrying the weight of their choices. That burden belonged to them, not me. A year later, I stood in my mother's garden. The roses she planted were blooming again. I had restored every room in the house exactly the way she loved it. Her favorite reading chair sat beside the fireplace. Her sewing machine remained in the same corner where I found the hidden compartment. Only now, it wasn't a reminder of betrayal. It was a reminder of a mother's love. I decided not to sell the house. Instead, I opened part of it as a community center where families caring for loved ones with cancer could find support, counseling, and temporary respite. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign, the Evelyn Carter Family House. Every family who walked through those doors reminded me why my mother fought so hard to protect it. Her greatest gift was never the building. It was the lesson hidden inside that letter. Love isn't proven by words, it's proven by actions. And betrayal always leaves footprints. Eventually, someone notices them. Sometimes I still think about Daniel. Sometimes I wonder whether he realizes that he didn't lose because of a court case. He lost because greed convinced him that a house was worth more than loyalty. He traded a faithful wife for a lie. Melissa lost something too. Not just her freedom, not just her reputation. She lost the privilege of calling herself my sister. Some relationships don't survive betrayal, and they shouldn't. As for me, I no longer measure wealth by bank accounts or property deeds. I measure it by the people who stand beside you when you have nothing to offer them. Those are your real treasures. Everything else can be stolen. Before I leave you today, remember this. Some people believe they can build a happy future on someone else's pain. They may succeed for a little while, but the truth has a way of waiting patiently. And when it finally arrives, it never knocks quietly. It walks through the front door. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Twisted Truths, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story. We'd also love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. We read as many of your comments as we can, and your support means the world to us. Until next time, remember, every truth has a story, and every betrayal leaves an echo.